All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here. It's always exciting to be at CES right at the beginning of the year. I think a lot of you are like me, and you are starting to just get into the holiday and relaxing, and then you come back and you get right into the middle of the action. And I don't think there's any place with more action going on right now than at CES, where we're seeing kind of the latest and greatest in technology. We're seeing AI everywhere, and kind of this is where a lot of very interesting announcements are coming out this week. So it's a good way to get the calendar year kicked off, and it's a good way to get us all back out of vacation mode and into work mode. So I have the pleasure of bringing in an industry pioneer tonight. You know, we all talk about AI, and we talk about how the semiconductor industry is really sort of at the foundation of the transformation that we're all experiencing, building the chips and building the future that's transforming every industry. But the semiconductor industry is no exception to that transformation themselves. And so it is my great pleasure to invite Greg Ernst, who is the Chief Revenue Officer of Intel. Join me on the stage. All right, so we're going to do a fireside chat, and we're going to kind of work through some questions about kind of the state of the union at Intel, across the industry, AI, and then hopefully we'll have a couple minutes at the end to do a little bit of QA.
Great.
So with that opening, Greg, I've got a list of questions here.
That's good.
Some surprises for you.
Thanks, John.
But maybe I'll start with kind of the one that's top of mind for everybody. There's been so much that's been going on in the industry and at Intel in particular, particularly over the course of the past year. You know, we've seen phenomenal performance, like a doubling of the stock price, a new CEO, a lot of super exciting deals announced. Why don't you just give us a little bit of insight into kind of where things are, what's going on at Intel? What's it look like from the inside?
It's been intense, but so Lip-Bu came in at the end of March, and at the time I was leading North America. And my predecessor and Lip-Bu, they decided probably time to make a change. And so Lip-Bu asked me to step in on an interim. And now I think it was right after Computex I became permanent. But with Lip-Bu, we sat down right away as a leadership team. Lip-Bu Tan's our CEO, and just really mapped out what do we need to get done for the company. Now, clearly, as a semiconductor company, there's no quick fix. But we mapped out, just like any of you would with your companies, a few concrete things, no regret, that we got to get done. One was we had to get a healthy balance sheet. And that was part of the catalyst of why we did the SoftBank deal, why we did the NVIDIA deal. Now, the U.S. government deal, that was not part of our plan. That came together rather quickly, but I think we can talk about that later.
We talked about, I'm sure the audience would love to hear more about how that actually works at the White House Mar-a-Lago meetings.
Yeah. As if there was not enough pressure on a chief revenue officer already to deliver earnings, and then your parents see your report card every quarter. Now the President of the United States gets to see my report card. So I could have, we'll see. We'll talk about that. But so we cleaned up the balance sheet. We really doubled down on the foundry business. That was a decision point. And as part of that, we had to execute on the leading edge technology. We made good progress. Actually, that's what we announced yesterday was our own products running on that technology. We call it 18A. Incredible products. We can talk more about that. So we got that done, focused on foundry. No large, huge customers that we've announced yet. As you can imagine, that's pretty confidential. And just like Accenture, it's up to the clients when we announce that. So we got that done, and then we're making progress, but I would say still a lot of work to do there. And then the third is just the core products and getting the core products better across the data center side, across the PC side. Lip-Bu's very his style's very hands-on. He's very good as far as a leader of really just determining what really matters and then holding us accountable to get it done. So as a leadership team, we're pretty stable now. We've come together, we made good progress, and it's exciting to see the share price up, but just I'm sure like all of you, it's at the end it's the growth rate and the operating margin that you have to deliver for investors, and ahead of that it's just they're betting on you to be successful, but we have to be successful. So.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know that there's been many companies that have been more in the spotlight and more under pressure from multiple angles than Intel, and how you've navigated this over the course of the past year has been pretty impressive. I know, Greg, you were in the middle of a lot of those strategic deals, which is kind of put the company back on the kind of trajectory that I think we're all accustomed to historically. And speaking of your products, you said that's kind of one of the things that you're very focused on. You did have a big announcement this week here at CES. One of the big announcements was Panther Lake. So it would be good to just get your perspective on AI PCs and what your expectations are for for that. Obviously, it's important. Accenture will probably be a big consumer of those devices.
That'd be great.
I have the old model. It's time for me to get an upgrade. But what are your thoughts in terms of how that's going to play out for you in 26?
Well, first of all, just a couple comments. The barrage of press when we didn't have a CEO, which was really from Thanksgiving of 24 until the March of 25. So 3-4 months. It's as you can imagine, it's difficult. Your employees are reading that. The spouses of your employees are reading that. The children of your employees may be reading that. Your clients are reading that. Your customers are reading that. So it was a tough moment, definitely a leadership moment for all of us. We got some instant, I would say, positive press with Lip-Bu coming in, and then there's been some negative ones that's permeated. So if anyone's got advice for me of how to handle the press piece, let me know. But I think it's naive for me as a chief revenue officer to think that my employees aren't reading that, my customers aren't reading that. Now, there's been a lot of positives, and as you said, it's crazy that the share price doubling, the positive sentiment that creates amongst the employees, the customers. The NVIDIA deal was a big part of that. Everyone saw the potential, and that was a conscious part of our decision. But then for us, it's back to the core products, and our PC products that we're launching, that we just launched yesterday, and available for sales January 27th are incredible products. Those products will be a vast majority of our PC revenue that we deliver over the next couple years. Good cost structure, good product, but most importantly for the clients, very, very good, just well-rounded platform. You get the incredible battery life, and we're going to talk more around AI. Just the reality is that once you buy that asset, it's running AI models with no additional cost. The more AI models you can run on the client, on the device, the less you're paying to your hyperscaler bills. And I think more and more we're seeing enterprises, but then also enterprise ISVs of thinking through how do you use the device, which is in most cases it's a fixed paid for asset to run these models. And it's been fun to see how that's evolved over just the last 9 months.
Yeah, and I think that trend is going to continue, and so I think this trajectory that you're on with AI PCs and running more, on the devices, running it on the edge, is going to be a big opportunity for Intel, and I think we'll be first in line for a lot of that. Just thinking about AI and technology transformation in general, like one of the things I know you've embarked on, in your domain, just if you think about operationally and how you run your business, is you've looked at a big reinvention of marketing and sales operations. And, while I know it's still relatively early, in the program that we're doing together, it would be interesting to kind of get your take on what do the early returns look like there.
Yeah. Well, for those that don't know, did Accenture, was at the start of the year?
Yeah.
It was right as Lip-Bu came in. We selected Accenture after a pretty robust RFP process, and they're doing a lot of our customer-facing operations, and then also a lot of the marketing. So through a managed services contract, we selected Accenture. Our belief internally, clearly there was a cost savings element, but our belief was also that we needed a technology first SI like Accenture to really catalyze and drive our own transformation on operations and marketing. And just 3 days ago, we flipped the switch. We're now Accenture leads, the Accenture employees lead on the customer operations. So that's from taking an order, cash collection, to shipping the products. We finished Q4 together, Accenture and Intel. We closed the books together on calendar Q4, and then now Accenture leads, or Accenture employees lead. So to me, the next 90 days will be telling, but we got through a lot, right, John? The last 5 or 6 months. A big part of getting through was communicating to our clients, who happen to also be Accenture clients. So you can imagine the large OEMs, server OEMs, hyperscalers, communicating the decision, getting them comfortable with the change, and maintaining the customer satisfaction scores. I'd say you guys were amazing at that. Is Ashton in the room?
There he is.
Hey, Ashton. Ashton was really, he's our leads. What would you say your role is? The exec sponsor? Okay. So he's exec sponsor. He doesn't do anything. But what he does do is he takes a lot of the heat from the clients and really worked through with us doing that transition. So thank you, Ashton and John, for the team getting that through. And then we've also using Accenture around accelerating our own agentic deployments. Yep. And that was really the true vision of why Intel selected Accenture and why we decided to go down this path in the first place. We saw how fast the space was moving. We didn't think it was realistic that like someone like myself, right? I'm a chief revenue officer. I understand customer operations. I understand customers, but I've never done an AI transformation. We didn't think it was really a realistic outcome for me to lead that. Now, clearly I'm bought into it. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. And that was the real vision why we selected Accenture.
Yeah, I mean, the point that you made around your customers or our customers is very true. And they are watching this very closely, because a lot of what we're doing with Intel is it's pretty progressive. It's leveraging AI. We're trying to move into more of an agentic space in the way that we serve them. They have like a zero tolerance, because it's so intertwined with their whole revenue cycles themselves. So the more successful we are executing for Intel, I think the more opportunity we'll have with some of these other companies who are likely going to be going down a similar path. And so Greg's been a great partner in sort of telling that story, and they're all watching closely themselves. And so it's a lighthouse client and footprint for us. And so, we're going to stay on it, Greg, don't worry. So let me then shift gears, like just because as you look at the, AI is driving the growth in the industry right now. And, I'm just interested in your perspective on Intel's portfolio of processors, Xeon, Gaudi, your, AI edge solutions. Yeah. Kind of compared to other options, how are you feeling like, Intel stacking up right now on, on the kind of the rest of the product suite?
If any of you, for your company, you need enterprise PCs, please, let's go the easy choice with the latest gen that we announced yesterday. I think it's a pretty easy choice. I would say on the opposite end of the side, which is the AI data center accelerators, until we don't have the right offering yet, we'll get there. The products that we do for Edge, I feel pretty strong about that. We've got some work to do to build out our humanoids offering in the software space. And then the unsung hero is just our standard Xeon CPU, which the demand is beyond bonkers. We have to keep wafers producing client CPUs for our OEMs. That business is just, it's too important for Intel historically. So it got to a point where margin optimization was not the choice that we wanted to do. It was just taking care of the clients and the core business. So just overall data center CPUs is just, it's insane.
It's it's like a great growth driver for your business right now, and I think that's going to continue, because there's a lot of build out that still needs to be done. So let me shift gears to the foundry. For anybody who's a student of Intel or this industry, or has been just reading the Wall Street Journal, knows how important it is for the U.S. to have a capability to be able to actually manufacture chips. There's been a lot of discussion and focus. It's an incredibly expensive investment around the foundry. It's a core part of Intel's IDM 2.0 strategy. It seems like you've made a ton of progress with 18A, putting you in a position where you're a much more viable competitor, say, versus TSMC, or be able to operate on par. I'd be interested in your take on how progress is there. So it's one of these things. It's almost a bit existential, depending on where you sit in the political spectrum. That's something that we have here in the U.S.
We're absolutely going to get there, and I believe it more now than 6 months ago. And our confidence is built. And if you follow our CEO's comments from earnings, what he said at the end of October for Q3 earnings, way more positive than end of July from our Q2 earnings. So we'll get there. I do believe, right, the United States needs semiconductor IP and manufacturing. And I believe the ownership of the IP is, in some cases, more important than where the fabs are actually located. Because at the end of the day, if there's any disruption on the supply chain and the U.S. government needs to come in and issue rated orders, which would mean that these orders need to come out because they're national security ahead of any other, you need a U.S. company that can do that. So we do believe that. Now, it's easier said than done, and I think we all agree TSMC is an amazing, amazing company. And Intel's a huge customer of TSMC ourselves. And they are an incredible services company. And that's the piece that that we need to learn and be services first for our clients, just like Accenture is. And that's really been the focus for us, is learning how to create the software and the automation to take our target customers' semiconductor designs, so the transistor layouts, then being able to give us those files and then us program our tools and systems and produce their product. That is a services business, and that is what TSMC does really, really well. And that's the piece that we've got early clients, we're learning together, and we'll get it done. But at the end of the day, just like Accenture, we need to earn the customers and there's nothing the U.S. administration can tell a customer that to force them to do business with us. At the end, it's up to us to do our piece and earn their business, earn their trust. At the end of the day, there's nothing more important for them than the ability to execute from a foundry side. And so the bar is extremely high, and TSMC set that bar. But we're figuring it out.
The government incentives, like the CHIPS Act, clearly help, right? And I know that was something that Gelsinger was all over. I think you guys like put that on the map and Intel in a good position there. I guess given how critical it is that that we have some of this capability and we're successful in sort of this AI race that we're a part of right now, what's your perspective? Is the government doing enough to support companies like Intel and others in the industry? Maybe this is another sort of on the borderline question.
No, I think it's absolutely. It's the current administration and the previous administration. They each did it. They've taken a different approach, but the mission and the problem that we're trying to solve as an industry is the same. President Trump does it slightly different than President Biden, or quite a bit different, but both the mission is the same. And we, as an American company, at the end of the day, we have global customers. We ship products to 159 countries around the world every week, but we are an American company, and we will follow the laws of American, and we will do what's best for the United States as well. So just like any, I think, Fortune 500 company, you learn how to work with the current administration, really understand what they're trying to get done and be successful. And in this case, what President Trump is driving is very well aligned with Intel, and I would say it's a bipartisan belief.
Yeah.
So members of Capitol Hill, both red and blue, all of the conversations we have are very, very much aligned. And in my conversations when I'm there, probably one of the focus areas now is really thinking through the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which is what funds the Department of Defense, and really ensuring that there's a sustainable, dependable semiconductor feed of products that go into the defense systems that the United States deploys. Now, clearly, we also offer that with other nations as well. So I would answer your question, yeah, administration's been a great partner. Previous administration was fantastic, and now it's up to Intel just to execute. But we're also solving some of these semiconductors that a defense system use are 20 years old.
Yeah.
And when we're a company built on leading edge transistors, so it's really, it does take a lot of work between the different agencies of the Department of Defense, through Congress, and then through the system integrators like the Lockheed Martins, the Boeings, the Northrops, of really how do you make that transition. And those are the pieces that we're in the brass tacks every day trying to solve. It's a great, fun challenge to solve. But we don't have it all figured out yet. And
but it's good. It's good to hear that that you're getting the support that you need from the administration, from the prior and the current administration. Just because I do think, in order to match up against China, that's required to be able to, given the scale of the investment. So I'm glad to hear it's going. Like your sort of sense that it's going as well as it is. But having said that, the semiconductor industry's expected to grow about 25%, over the course of the next year, and so as you consider that, what constraints or challenges do you see, talent challenges, other supply chain challenges in, supporting that kind of growth and demand?
A couple things, right? One, there is just the power delivery to data centers limiting. I think all of us, our clients, see that, feel that, and the rate of power production, not just in the United States, but in most countries around the world, it's not at a rate. If there's more power, there would be more semiconductors sold. So that's a limiter. And then we have a near-term challenge of we have a lot of really well-funded companies that are building these data centers, and they need memory. And the memory capacity and the memory footprint isn't built out to support it. And so unlike the start of COVID, where there was all of a sudden a semiconductor shortage, now there's a semiconductor shortage, but the companies that need the semiconductors and the memory, they're not going to let the price of memory hold them back. So one of the things that we are struggling, we're working as good partners with our customers, the PC OEMs, is really trying to make sure that they have a secure line of memory as well. And there is just a reality that different companies have a different ability to spend, which drives the demand up. So this is something as an industry we need to work through.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that there's not a lot of collateral damage of other businesses that use compute because they can't keep up with the spending race.
So, you know, and
I don't know, any advice you have there, John, would be great.
well, I would say I would link. The last question I was going to ask was just really this foundational question around whether the U.S. is on its front foot enough in terms of investing in the energy that we're going to need in order to sort of power the kind of this AI transformation wave that we're going to see over the course of the next year. And you contrast it to China, which I think has got a relatively well put together, power generation plan. And so I do think that's a bit of an Achilles heel. If you think about this entire conference and all of the products and the solutions that we talk about and that we've come to enjoy, sort of Intel sits at the foundation level of making all of that a reality. Intel and a couple of your partners, and being able to continue driving, growing, seeing the innovation, competing and succeeding. Like, I do think it's ultimately going to come down to whether we're able to actually generate the power that's required to fuel the compute that all of us are going to want to be leveraging.
Yeah.
And so I think if I were to say where I'd love to see the administration do even more is in that space. They're doing a lot now, but there's probably more that they could do from an investments and from regulation in order to unhook more investment, more entrepreneurialism, more power, and that I think will provide a good foundation for fueling more growth for companies like you and others. And
I see
would
it,
be a
though.
beneficiary.
Yeah, I think that challenge is understood between you have David Sachs, the AI czar, the Department of Energy has been bringing in the technology companies. So, and then you also see the U.S. side, Congress doing things around rare earth minerals.
Yep.
So I do think as an ecosystem, as a technology ecosystem, this administration very easy to work with for technology companies, and we need to bring proposals and solutions. But I hear the appetite.
I love the fact that a lot of this is more transparent to all of us than maybe it ever had been in the past, so that we all can see the challenges, and even just some of the discussions around the state-by-state AI legislation. Sort of, David Sachs is very vocal on that point as well, just so that doesn't become a constraint to our ability to grow and to innovate. So there's a lot going on. Greg, I know we're at time, and we...
Well, can I have time for one story you brought up?
Yeah.
So, I think it was November. It was the day before the government shutdown. I was at the Department of Energy, and I called the elevator to come down, and they have this sign at the Department of Energy. It says, if you're taking this elevator, you're taking a power away that could be going to one of the servers in the United States. So I was like, their way of saying, take the stairs, you lazy bum. I was like, oh, wow, I'm glad that's in the Department of Energy. But I think we need I'd probably put those signs up at Accenture and Intel as well.
I know, it would probably make our health a little bit better also. Well, Greg, I want to thank you for joining us. It's been a real privilege to talk to you.
Thank you.
I know, I get the opportunity to work with Greg and talk with him, and it's just been interesting learning after the fact where you were and in what meetings you were in. I'm always amazed because you're busy, can't get a hold of you, you're somewhere, and then we find out loud, oh, he was just working this deal with NVIDIA. Oh, he was working this deal. So this man is a legend, and he deserves a lot of the credit for the success that Intel has been having recently. It was a privilege to be able to talk with you tonight and get a little bit of insight around kind of the state of the industry, how you're driving the Intel growth. And we appreciate y'all being here. All of you, thank you for joining us tonight. As I said, the bar is is open. I don't know if I had any other closing announcement to make, but stay and enjoy cocktail hour. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.